inviting me here to Creative Mornings. I'm really excited to talk to you about female resistance fighters and about the theatrical audio tour I have made on this subject. My name is Frederique Donker, and in my work I like to, as Charlotte said, I like to look for the untold, underexposed stories and try to make them visible, because I think stories can connect us, people and time, present, past and generations with each other. Stories are universal and help us to understand ourselves, but also each other, and find commonality with others, and we can learn from them for the future. I prefer to listen to stories and explore different stories to also make my own perspective as complete as possible. And I think it's important that everyone is heard. These untold, underexposed stories can also tilt our fixed perspectives. And I'm not much of a reader myself, so my work is usually visual, or in this case auditory, but this was actually the first time I've ever made an audio tour, so that was really exciting to do. I have made the audio tour Vrouwen in Verzet. Translated, it's Women in the Resistance, with these 9 women and with Anna Huizing. And we made this audio tour together for Theater naar de Dam. And that's on the 4th of May this year we made it. And Theater naar de Dam is a theater event where theaters open their doors to the audience to broaden and deepen their commemoration on the 4th of May. That's the Dutch Remembrance Day for the Second World War. And they do that at simultaneously theater performances. So this year, of course, that couldn't, live theater wasn't really possible due to the corona measures. And that's why we came up with this audio tour. But before I go into the content of the audio tour, I think it's good to tell you that it's a story, Truus en Trui, about a Dutch story, and specifically about women from the city of Utrecht. So I think I will use a few Dutch words, but I will try to explain them as good as possible. But I think it's not important to understand the complete story about female resistance fighters. But first of all, I would like to ask, I can't see you, but what do you imagine when you think about a resistance hero? Is that this image, Soldaat van Oranje, or is it more these pictures? Because I think that the stereotype of a resistance fighter from the Second World War was that of a man with a gun. Actually, also for me that was the case, but that's because the stories of male resistance members are well known, and the stories of female resistance fighters are hardly ever told. Women were merely assistants or housewives or widows in the stories told. And I think this is slowly changing because more stories come to light. But in the post-war years, there was a lot of attention. Actually, there was only attention for the heroic deeds of the male resistance fighters. The role of women in the resistance has been neglected and underestimated for years, while they, just like men, actually took in people in hiding. They participated in armed robberies and attacks. But only the story of the girl with the red hair, het meisje met de rode haren, Hannie Schaft, that enjoyed great fame in the Netherlands. But she was not the only, and definitely not the first, female resistance fighters. But actually, because of this man, this is Lou de Jong, and he was a very important historian at the National Institute of War in the Netherlands. And he, as you can see, he made a 12 part series about the Second World War in the Netherlands. And of course, he was a man of his time. He did not really see the role of women. And that's why in these 12, in this 12 part, women were actually just a footnote in the resistance part. So that's why I think they've been a little bit forgotten in this part. And if they appear in the Dutch historiography devoted to the resistance, usually that's in a supportive role as a courier. And they actually were praised for their work, and I think that's rightly so. But because of that, it was not mentioned that they were also in leading roles in the resistance, and that's really difficult to correct now in history. But I think and stories of women in resistance also have been lost because some of them couldn't really tell them and didn't survive the war. Okay, but I think you get my point right now. And this was a really important motive for me to make this audio tour. And because working on this audio tour also, my knowledge on the resistance of the Second World War has been supplemented with stories of women, and therefore my view has been shifted. And more precisely, we've mentioned them before, because of the stories of Truus van Lier and Trui van Lier. These are two nieces with actually completely different stories of resistance on whom we based this audio tour. And even though I had studied in the same city, Utrecht, and I even joined the same student union as them, I hardly ever knew anything about them. So when I came across their stories, actually that was because mainly because there's a group of initiators in Utrecht who asked the municipality to place a monument for Truus, and that's coming this year. Actually, I think. Not sure, but that's what they said. They will make that to give meaning and courage to the women to resist, and that's with Truus van Lier as an inspiring example. And I thought her story was indeed very courageous and inspiring when I saw that. I'll just tell a little bit about these two women, but of course you really have to go to the tour, and we will tell you a bit more, but just a little bit so you know what they have done, what they did in the war. Truus van Lier, so that's this woman. She was a member of a resistance group, CSS, during the Second World War. It was a fairly radical and it was a communist group. She started small with she worked as a courier also and smuggled weapons and illegal literature. And she even joined a NSB student front, that's the Dutch Nazi political party, to infiltrate the German organization. So that's really, I think, a really courageous thing to do, very brave. And she arranges hiding places for Jewish families, and in 1943, she shot and killed a Utrecht NSB chief of the police at the Willemplantsoen, and that's also the place where they're making this statue for her. After that, she was arrested and deported for this, and that same year executed in Sachsenhausen. But her niece, this is Trui van Lier, she interrupted her studies to set up a nursery, Kindjeshaven, that is now a ice cream shop, really good ice cream. And through that she managed to save 150 Jewish children, bring them to safety. And maybe this is more, this type of resistance was more in line with the role of women, of the expectation of women in that time. Although what she did was really brave and required female leadership, because not only what she did, I think it's really smart. She didn't only have Jewish children there, but also children from Dutch girls and German soldiers to actually cover up what she was doing there. And that made her really strong, because if anyone would ask her, what is this child doing here? She would say, go ask the ortscommandant, like your chief, if I'm allowed to take care of these children. And then with that, she would just silence everyone and could go on with what she was doing. And what I think is interesting about these two stories is that their resistance work started relatively early in the war, where most students started when the universities had to close in 1943. They actually both started in 1940, so they were really early, had a really early drive to do something at that time. I think, we don't know exactly why, but they were half Jewish, and I think they realized early on what was really going on. And I think that's what we said. You can really, in Truus van Leerhuis, you can already see like the determination in her eyes in this picture. And in collaboration with the UWSV, that's the student union where Truus and Trui were once member of, and there we asked 9 women around the same age as them, 19 to 22, to research these stories and make this audio tour. I asked these women because I think it's important for them to relate and to reflect on the stories personally. That was also one of the most important things I asked them about writing, to really make it personal for them. And that's why we did a long research to really understand the stories. And we asked ourselves, what would we have done in their place? What would we have done? And I think it was also maybe easier for the students to relate, because the student life also turned out completely different than planned in 2020 and 21. And I have asked one of the students, this is Tessa, to tell about her experience and what she has learned from these stories. So,
hi, I'm Tessa and I'm 20 years old. When we were doing research for the audio tour, the story of especially Truus resonated with me. I found myself wondering, would I ever dare to do that? She was so incredibly brave, and she was just about my age, only 2 years older. I couldn't imagine what it was like to join the resistance and set aside your own fear, because I'm privileged to live in a time where my country is at peace, and has been for quite some time. War is not affecting me at the moment, but then again, there are other types of resistance groups that are fighting for what they believe is right. Maybe the resistance in these days isn't against the oppression of Jews by the Nazis, but rather the oppression of other minority groups, such as Black people, the LGBTQ+ community, and women. I find myself advocating for justice for these groups. I'm trying to actively enter into conversation about the oppression of the minority groups, as addressing the problem is a start to solving it. Making the audio tour about women in resistance made me realize that the resistance isn't something that was only relevant during the Second World War. It is something that always has been there and always will be, for as long as oppression and inequality appear in our society. Truus and Trui inspire me to do better, and I'm glad we were able to tell their stories.
I was really impressed by these young women that participated, like Tessa, because we talked about history, but maybe more about the present, and I could only hope that they would reflect on the stories like this. We started with the idea of actually making a live theater performance that would go through the city of Utrecht, but thanks to COVID we eventually ended up choosing another form, and this theatrical audio tour. And I say thanks to COVID because I think it became a really good way to make the students write these personal letters, but also dialogues and monologues. And they were really, we had a lot of freedom to use different forms and make it really personal and to perform it like this. And of course the audience can walk it individually or in small groups. And it's a lasting piece for the city of Utrecht, and I think that's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm curious if there are any people who went on the tour last week. I can't see you, but I hope there are a few here. And I would really love to hear afterwards what you have heard and what you have remembered of the stories you've heard. This is the website, www.vrouweninverzet.nl. It is all in Dutch, though. And the first rehearsals were on Zoom, as you can see. It feels like a really long time ago to see this, because we were still in a really strict lockdown. Even we had an evening curfew. All really bored and pale faces listening to me tell about Truus. But I'm really thankful that we could start the research like this, because we could discuss documentaries and we talked to different experts like Jessica van Geel. She's actually writing a book about Truus van Lier, and I think that will be released in February 2022. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. And we walked with historian Frank de Munnik through Utrecht. He took us to a lot of different places, and it was really fascinating to see the city through his stories, and to see how the war is still visible in Utrecht. And actually, most importantly, for the research, we talked with women who had experienced the war themselves, all through telephone or video calls. And this was most important for me because it made the connection between these two generations, and to bring the stories to life, to really tell from a memory. And we actually got a reaction for two women who were as little child were sent to the nursery Kindjeshaven as a cover, to cover the Jewish children that was there. And just to give an impression, I have put a little bit of the audio tour in this. It's in Dutch, but I will explain afterwards. Wij kregen 2 reacties van vrouwen die zich konden herinneren dat zij als dekmantel naar Kindjeshaven werden gestuurd. Betty en Leni.
Hallo.
Hallo.
Hallo, je spreekt met Stephanie.
Nou, leuk om kennis te maken.
Ja, onwijs leuk.
Hoeveelstejaars ben je?
Sorry?
Hoeveelstejaars ben je?
Ik ben derdejaars nu.
Oh, kind.
Ja, ik zit er middenin.
Heb je 59, hoe vind je die dan?
Ja, prachtig.
Ik hoor altijd antiek.
Ze deelden hun herinneringen aan Kindjeshaven met
Ik
ons.
was een klein meisje,
Ja.
heel klein. Dus ik heb zelf eigenlijk weinig herinneringen.
Ja.
Behalve dat toen het mijn ouders duidelijk werd dat het gebruikt werd voor Joodse kinderen,
Ja.
dat ze me er toen afgehaald hebben.
Oké, en dat zal dan zijn geweest vanwege de veiligheid dan toch? Voor u?
Zeker, ja.
Ja,
Betty kon zich vooral de hongerwinter bij Kindjeshaven herinneren.
Ik ben 3 maanden in de hongerwinter geweest en ik heb nog even mijn broer gevraagd. Die had ook die herinnering aan die kou in die zaal en dat hij geen beddengoed had. En dat was dus...
Maar de boterhammen waren wel lekkerder dan thuis.
Ja. En die sneden ze anders dan mijn moeder het deed. Dus dat vond ik wel grappig dat ik dat als herinnering heb.
Ja.
Maar dat is een soort leverpastei ook. Ik begrijp niet hoe ze dat nog hadden in die tijd. Maar...
So you could hear them speak from their memories of Kindjeshaven. In the rehearsals we had a lot of different, really interesting discussions with each other. One of the last writing days I asked, aren't we pretending a bit too much as if all women were protesting and on the good side? And Fien, who is also here, had a really good point, and she said that's so typical of women that we are trying to nuance it. And she said, this is an audio tour made by only women, about women. It is all about the brave, resistant work that has been done, and that's the story we are telling, not of that of the average Dutch women who were not involved in the war at that time. And I thought that discussion was really interesting, so I just asked her to write that into the to the audio tour for people to hear what we discussed with each other. And this is Fien, and I also asked her about her experience. So here it comes.
Hi, my name is Fien van Snippenberg and I am one of the creators of the audio tour Vrouwen in Verzet. And when I started this project, I really had no idea what we were going to make and what was expected of us. After we had done all the research, it was still not so clear to me what we were going to make. By now I knew a lot of Truus and Trui van Lier, and I'd sketched a picture in my head of how the war was in Utrecht. Frederique and Anna let us completely free, and we were allowed to write whatever we want. And the writing, it became clear to me that for these women it was an easy decision to join the resistance. They just did what they could, and yeah, that was it. And at the point we came in touch with mevrouw Lennep van der Most van Spijk. I know it's a really long name. She told Frederique and me that as soon as the universities closed, lots of women joined the resistance just because they had nothing left to do. And for me, I always compare it to the moment we also had nothing left to do in March 2020. And everyone around me, including myself, started looking for ways we could help. Bringing soup to elderly, making phone calls with elderly, going babysit for free. For us students, it wasn't anything special. We helped where we could, and our studies also stopped for a month or something. Mrs. van der Most van Spijk also told us the same thing. She still does not feel special that she worked for the resistance that time. And also today she does not feel special at what kind of work she did at the resistance that time. When the audio tour went live on the 4th of May this year, I took her along that day to do a short part of the tour, and she absolutely loved it. Mrs. van der Most van Spijk will be 101 years old on August 7. Once every 2 weeks I go visit her, and she tells me stories about the older days, and I tell my stories. She's always really interested in what I do, and she really teaches me to enjoy the little things like flowers. She knows all the flowers in the garden and always tells me what kind of flower it is and how it grows, etc. For me, Mrs. Most van der Spijk is very special, even though she doesn't think so herself. I'm really grateful for her that I've gotten a new granny since we met.
Between Fien and Mrs. van der Most van Spijk, we interviewed her about her student life in the war and her work in the resistance. Here, these two. Because and she has also received an award herself for her brave work in the war. And I am actually most proud, I think, of this friendship this project has brought between them and how they inspire each other. Because with this project, I really hope that history would also be reflected in the present, and that through these brave women, Truus and Trui, and other female resistance fighters, we create awareness about the role of women then, but certainly also about the role of women now. And for the participants like Fien and Tessa you saw before, I think to think about their own place in society as a woman. Yeah. So thank you. And this is the day that we listened together to the audio tour, and in the end you will see this. If you are quick, you can still see a few of the flowers, so definitely go and see it. Thank you very much. Yep.